Sometimes a person who has a relative, let it be a husband, a wife, or whatever, who is living with them, is unable to maintain that. They're unable to maintain that situation because the house isn't suitable. If the person says elderly or disabled or whatever. Now, there are a number of very generous grants available to people who want to convert their house to accommodate their relative, whether it be elderly or disabled, and allow them to continue living with them. And I'll just give a brief overview of what those grants consist of. First of all, the first thing you need to do if you're applying for one is to get an application form. Now, this is the application form, and the interesting thing about this application form is that all three grants are dealt with in the same form. So all you have to do basically is choose which one you're applying for and tick that box. And that's the only relevant part you'll then have to complete. A very important thing to bear in mind is that when you apply for one of those grants, you must wait until you're approved before you start the job. If you start the job before the person comes from the council to approve and assess the amount of grant you're going to get, then you automatically exclude yourself. So you must wait to start the job until you get prior approval from the council. Now, there are basically, as I said, three types of grant. The first one is called the Housing Adaptation Grant. This is for big jobs like extensions, downstairs bathrooms, etc. The maximum amount payable here is 40,000. That's the maximum, the top grant you can get. So, for example, you're doing a very big job, bathroom, toilet, etc., and the cost comes to 50,000. If you get 100% grant, the most you can get is 40,000. So you'll have to come up with the balance yourself. That's the main type of grant. Secondly, there's a thing called housing aid for older people. This applies, incidentally, the first type of grant will only apply if you're looking for an extension for an elderly or disabled person. That needs to be repeated. The second type of grant is called housing aid for older people. Now, in order to qualify for this grant, the person applying must be 66 years, must have passed their 66th birthday. Basically, this is a grant for repairs to enable people to continue to live in their own homes. It's only for people who actually own their homes, where the home is privately owned. It doesn't apply to council properties or rented properties. And it covers issues like repairing or replacing the roof, rewiring the house, doors and windows, and these type of repairs. The maximum grant here is 10,700. That is the maximum you can get. And finally, the third type of grant is a thing called Mobility Aids Grant. Again, it's for elderly and disabled people who find it hard to move around and function properly in their own homes. And it covers things like, that assist mobility. That's why it's called the Mobility Aids Grant. It covers things like grab rails, a ramp, an accessible shower, a stair lift, etc. The maximum amount for that grant is €8,000. Now, as I've said earlier, there's a means test for those grants, and it looks forbidding when you look at it, initially, but it's not quite as bad as it seems at first glance. And it's the same means test for all three grants, basically. If you have an assessable income of up to 37, and I stress the word assessable income, up to 37,500, you qualify for the full grant. If it's between 37,500 and 43,500, in the case of the first grant, you get 75%, and so on and so forth, up to 75,000 assessable income. If you're over 75,000 assessable income, you do not qualify. Now, the question is, what's assessable income? Assessable income is not just your straight income, including your gross income, which usually is your income before you take off tax and PRSI, etc. Because for two reasons. First of all, there are a certain amount of things that are not counted as income. Excuse me, it's counted as income. There's a certain amount of things excluded when you're calculating that assessable income. Things like, for example, carers allowance, fuel allowance, child benefit, domiciliary care allowance, working family payment. All those are amongst the things that are not counted. Secondly, if you have children under the age of 18 or over the age of or between 18 and 22 who are on full-time education, you're allowed 6,500 off your income to calculate assessable income for each one. If the person applying for the grant is a carer, you can claim another 6,500 off the assessable income to calculate the amount. And if you're paying rent or if you're paying a mortgage, you can claim up to 6,500 of that. If what you're paying is over 6,500, you can claim up to 6,500 of that as well. And you know, when you look at cases, in different cases, especially when there's a number of kids involved, a number of kids living in the house, etc., and you're paying a rent or a mortgage, I mean, the figure for assessable income can come down quite dramatically. Now, the income that's counted is just the income of the applicant and their spouse. You know, if there are other incomes in the house, they are not counted. So it's the applicant and his or her spouse. So that makes the thing obviously less formidable than it appears at first sight. There's a number of things to be borne in mind. Sometimes, you, especially for the bigger grant, the housing adaptation grant, you may need an occupational therapist report, but you know that will be clear. The council will indicate that to you when you send in the form. Sometimes the council will encourage people maybe to get their own occupational therapist, which costs a few €100. It speeds up the process, but otherwise it's covered in the grant itself. The important thing to remember is that you don't start the work until such time as you get approval from the council. The way it works is you fill out your form. You must get 2 estimates from 2 builders, both of whom have to be tax compliant, of course, and you submit that with your form to the council. They will come back and ask you for any other forms they may need. Then the matter is processed, and somebody will call from the council to assess how much they think the job is going to cost. In many cases, you'll find that what they think the job is going to cost will be somewhat less than the builder's estimates you've got. But in many cases, it's fairly close. And if you qualify for the grant, and they say the job, for example, is going to cost, let's say, 10,000. If your assessable income is under 37,500, you get the full 10. You get whatever they say the job is going to cost. It'll be the full. In this case, the full 10,000. So it's a fairly generous scheme. People have made the point that, you know, with the cost, with the huge money the state is paying to assist people who have to put their elderly or disabled relatives into nursing homes, etc., that these grants should be more generous, because, you know, it's in everybody's interest, and I think it's part of state policy as well, that people should be kept at home in their own homes for as long as humanly possible, throughout until the end of their life, really. And I think that 99.9% of people would prefer if that were the case. There are some people, of course, who are so bad, or so ill, or so disabled that they simply can't be catered for at home with the best will in the world. But generally speaking, it is preferable to keep people at home rather than putting them into a nursing home. And as I say, I agree. I think maybe the grant should be more generous. There should be more money spent in that direction. I think you'd save the state an awful lot of money by doing that. But even as they stand at the moment, this maximum of 40,000, 10,700 and 8,000, I mean, it's based not on your actual income, but on your assessable income. And people will want to bear that in mind. And I've come across cases of people who didn't apply for the grant, who would have been entitled to some part of the grant. They didn't apply because their income was too high. They were simply unaware that there was these generous deductions and certain exclusions as well. So if anybody has any issues on that, if they want to email me, they'll be more than welcome. I've only given a general outline of the situation now. I haven't gone into every single detail, but that's the general picture.